The Mediterranean stretched endlessly, its surface glittering under the fading sun, but for those on board the flotilla, the water was not simply an expanse of blue. It was a barrier, a test, and perhaps the last stage before history would remember their names. The mission was bold: break through the naval blockade of Gaza with nothing more than wooden decks, food crates, medical supplies, and the strength of ordinary people carrying extraordinary conviction. On the lead vessel, conversations blended with the sounds of the sea. Some activists prayed quietly, others scribbled in notebooks, recording their thoughts in case the journey ended badly. The flotilla wasn't just one boat, it was a small convoy, a fleet of courage assembled from different corners of the world. From Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas, they had come together with a single purpose: to deliver aid where aid was forbidden, and to stand as witnesses where silence had reigned. Among them were several volunteers from the United States, and their presence gave the mission a sharper edge in global attention. Particularly striking was a small group from Florida. Newspapers back home had covered their departure with equal parts admiration and alarm. The Miami Herald ran a headline: "Florida activists join Gaza Flotilla, hope or hazard." Some Americans called them heroes, others called them reckless. Yet for those stepping onto the boats, there was no ambiguity. Their hearts had already chosen. Sarah Thompson was one of them, a 46-year-old pediatric nurse from Miami. She had lived her life in the service of others. She had no children of her own, but countless young patients called her Auntie Sarah. For years, she worked night shifts, holding tiny hands through the worst pain, reassuring parents who had lost hope. Yet nothing on American soil had prepared her for the images she saw on her phone. Bombed Yet schools, lifeless children carried from rubble, families huddled in shelters with no medicine. One evening, scrolling through footage of Gaza, Sarah whispered to herself, "If I can heal children at home, I cannot ignore the children over there." That single thought consumed her. She wrote to an international aid group organizing the flotilla and asked to join. Her friends begged her not to go. Some called her brave, others called her foolish. But Sarah smiled gently and replied, "If my conscience is at peace, what else matters?" On deck, Sarah carried two items that defined her journey. One was a stethoscope slung around her neck, her symbol of healing. The other was a small American flag folded neatly in her bag. She didn't bring it as a symbol of state power, but as a reminder of the ideals she wished her country truly embodied: freedom, dignity, compassion. She hoped that if cameras captured her arrest, the world would see not just another protester, but a nurse from Florida representing the heart of humanity. Nearby sat Michael Reyes, a 28-year-old graduate student from Orlando. Michael had been restless ever since completing his political science degree. He marched in campus protests, spoke at rallies, but always left with a hollow feeling. "Words are easy," he confessed to a friend. "Real change comes when you put your body where your mouth is." The flotilla gave him that chance. His parents were terrified. His father pleaded, "Son, they have guns, you only have words." Michael answered, "Then let them see the power of words that refuse to die." Sarah and Michael became close during the voyage. On quiet nights, they sat side by side, staring at the endless horizon. She reminded him to breathe slowly when anxiety struck. He reminded her that her courage inspired everyone around her. Together, they represented two faces of Florida: experience and youth, healing and protest, united on a fragile ship sailing toward a wall of power. The flotilla itself carried a strange mix of energy: hope, fear, determination, and doubt. Each activist had a reason. Amina, a young journalist from London, scribbled in her notebook furiously, trying to capture every detail. "History is happening," she whispered, "and if they silence us tomorrow, at least these words will remain." Beside her, a Turkish father clutched photographs of his children, telling anyone who would listen that he wanted them to grow up in a world where justice wasn't just a word. From South Africa came an older man who had lived through apartheid, insisting that he recognized oppression when he saw it. As the days passed, the sea seemed to shift moods. Sometimes it was calm, as though blessing their journey. Other times, waves crashed violently, soaking the deck and reminding them how small they were against nature itself. But nothing unsettled them more than the silence of the horizon. They knew the Israeli Navy was near. They could feel the eyes of radars scanning them. Radios crackled with interruptions, sometimes just static, sometimes faint voices that never finished sentences. On the second evening, the flotilla gathered on deck for a meeting. The lead organizer, a Norwegian named Erik, stood on a crate to address them. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. "Friends, tonight we enter dangerous waters. The Israeli Navy will not allow us to reach Gaza without confrontation. Some of you may be detained, some of you may be deported. We do not know what level of force will be used, but remember this. Our mission is humanitarian. We carry food, medicine, books, not weapons. Whatever happens, we must remain committed to non-violence. Our strength lies in our peace." The group responded with applause, though many clapped through tears. A few activists whispered prayers, others hugged tightly as though it might be the last time. Sarah Place put her hand on Michael's shoulder. "Remember," she told him, "fear is natural, but love is stronger." That night the air grew heavier. Stars dotted the sky, but the horizon carried shadows. Around midnight, a voice thundered from the darkness. "This is the Israeli Navy. Stop your engines immediately. You are entering restricted waters." The words echoed across the waves, cold and mechanical. Activists rushed to the deck, squinting into the night. Far in the distance, spotlights pierced the blackness. Shapes of large ships moved closer, their engines rumbling like thunder. Erik responded with a megaphone. "We are in international waters. We are unarmed civilians carrying humanitarian aid. We demand safe passage to Gaza." His words were swallowed by the sea, but the determination in his tone spread through the crowd. The Navy's reply was blunt. "Turn back, or we will board your vessels." A murmur spread among the passengers. Some trembled, others raised their fists. Sarah whispered a prayer. Michael gritted his teeth, trying to record every detail in his mind. Amina scribbled furiously in her notebook. The moment of truth arrives. The silence of the world is breaking. Then came the spotlights, blinding beams cutting through the darkness, illuminating every face on deck. Activists shielded their eyes but refused to move. The waves grew rougher as the Navy ships circled, tightening their grip like predators closing in on prey. The confrontation had begun. The beams of light sliced through the night like swords, trapping the flotilla in a cage of brilliance. Every face on deck was frozen in stark white glare. Men shielding their eyes, women clutching one another, children staring wide-eyed at the looming shadows of warships. The activists had prepared themselves for this moment, but the reality of it was far more suffocating than the rehearsals in safe, distant halls. The Israeli Navy had arrived. Their voices thundered over loudspeakers again. "This is your final warning. Stop your engines. Submit to inspection." On the deck of the lead vessel, Sarah Thompson felt her pulse quicken. She glanced at the medical crates stacked beside her. Inside were antibiotics, bandages, children's vaccines, all the supplies denied by the blockade. She thought of the hospital wards in Gaza, where mothers cradled dying children because the medicine was trapped behind walls. The crates seemed to breathe, as though holding the weight of lives themselves. Her fear gave way to anger. Raising her voice above the roar of engines, she cried out, "We are nurses and students, not criminals. Let us pass." The soldiers did not answer with words. Instead, the water erupted as Navy vessels surged forward, waves crashing violently against the smaller humanitarian boats. The activists staggered, some falling, others gripping the rails. Loudspeakers boomed again, "Stop immediately, or we will board." Erik, the Norwegian organizer, gripped the megaphone with shaking hands. His voice cracked but carried. "We are in international waters. You have no right to stop us. We demand safe passage to Gaza." His defiance was met with silence. Then ropes came flying. The first team of commandos swung across the gap, boots pounding onto the deck. Dark helmets, black rifles, armored vests. An entire world of military force colliding against unarmed civilians. The deck exploded with shouts. Activists locked arms, chanting through tears, their voices trembling but unbroken. "Freedom for Gaza! Freedom for Gaza!" Soldiers barked orders in Hebrew. Some pushed people to the ground, zip-tying their wrists. Others stormed toward the control room, seizing command of the vessel. The sound of boots, the clash of voices, the hiss of water cannons. It was chaos made flesh. Michael Reyes felt himself shoved backward until his spine hit the cold railing, a soldier's gloved hand pressed against his chest. For a heartbeat, Michael saw nothing but the barrel of a rifle inches from his face. His breath caught, the world spinning. Then he remembered Sarah's words, "Love is stronger." With trembling courage, he shouted, "I am unarmed. I am an American. We carry food, not weapons." The soldier's eyes flickered for a moment, but the commandos did not stop. They had their orders. Nearby, Sarah herself was dragged to the ground. Her stethoscope clattered against the deck. A soldier pinned her wrists behind her back, his knee pressing against her spine. She gasped for air, shouting through the pain, "Children are dying. You can stop us, but you cannot stop the truth." Her words carried across the deck, echoing in the minds of those watching. Amina, the journalist, forced her pen across paper even as soldiers surrounded her. Her notebook shook violently in her hands, but she wrote one final line before it was ripped away. "The night we were silenced was the night the world was forced to listen." The confrontation grew violent. Activists who refused to sit were thrown to the deck. Water cannons blasted across the crowd, drenching clothes, numbing skin, making it impossible to see. Shouts rose, some in Arabic, some in English, some in Spanish, all blending into a single cry of defiance. A Turkish man shouted the word "justice" over and over until he was struck down. An older woman screamed as soldiers yanked her away from her husband. Through it all, the cameras kept rolling, at least for a few moments. Some activists had managed to stream live, their footage flickering across phones and screens thousands of miles away. For a brief window, the world saw everything. Soldiers storming civilian boats, activists bleeding, the American nurse crying out for children she'd never met. Then the signals went dark, cut by electronic jamming. Onshore, families and supporters who had been following the live feeds suddenly stared at blank screens. Panic spread across social media. Hashtags erupted. Hashtag Gaza Flotilla. Hashtag Freedom for Gaza. Hashtag Florida to Gaza. Back on the ship, the activists were losing ground. Dozens were restrained, their wrists bound. Soldiers barked orders, herding them into corners of the deck. Michael found himself pressed between two others, his body trembling but his voice still shouting. "The world is watching you," he yelled. "The world is watching." He didn't know if anyone could hear, but saying it kept him from breaking. Sarah lay on the wet deck, her cheek pressed against the wood, her stethoscope gone. Her lips whispered the prayer she always said before long hospital nights. "Lord, give me strength to heal, even when my hands are tied." The minutes stretched like hours. Time lost all meaning. For those on the flotilla, it was no longer about reaching Gaza, it was about surviving the night. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was resilience. One young boy, barely 19, sat cross-legged on the deck with zip-tied hands and began to sing softly. His voice was shaky at first, but then it grew louder, carrying across the salt-soaked air. The song was about freedom, about the dignity of the oppressed. Soon others joined, their voices uniting in a haunting chorus. The soldiers froze for a moment, glancing at one another, uncertain. But the singing did not stop. It rose like a shield, fragile yet unbreakable, echoing against the steel hulls of warships. Finally, the command came. Engines roared. The flotilla was forced to change direction. One by one, the vessels were commandeered, their courses redirected toward Israel. The blockade had held. Gaza remained unreachable. As dawn crept over the sea, the exhausted activists sat bound in silence. Some wept, others closed their eyes, imagining the faces of the people they had come to help. For Sarah, it was the children she had never met, the ones who would never see the medicine she carried. For Michael, it was the promise he had made to himself, that his words would not die. For Amina, it was the line she never finished writing, the sentence that would remain incomplete in her stolen notebook. The sun rose blood red, casting its reflection across the waves. The flotilla, once a fleet of hope, was now a convoy of captives. But in the hearts of those on board, one truth burned brighter than ever. The world had seen enough to never forget. The flotilla never reached Gaza. Instead, it was escorted under heavy guard to the Israeli port of Ashdod. By the time the ships docked, dawn had broken fully, painting the sky in gold, though for the activists it felt more like ash and iron. One by one, they were marched down the gangplank, wrists bound, eyes hollow from exhaustion. Cameras flashed from a distance, journalists penned notes, and officials spoke rehearsed lines. Illegal attempt to breach the blockade, necessary security measures, humanitarian aid to be redirected through official channels. But the faces of the detainees told another story. Bruised, drenched, yet unbroken, they stood as silent witnesses to what had transpired on the sea. Sarah's stethoscope was gone, her uniform torn, yet when reporters shouted questions, she managed to cry out, "We are nurses and teachers, not criminals. We came with medicine, and they met us with guns." Her voice cracked, but it carried through microphones across the globe. Inside detention facilities, the activists were interrogated. Some were threatened with deportation, some were kept in solitary rooms with only a metal bed and a flickering light. Michael was shoved into a small cell with 3 others. He scribbled on scraps of paper whatever words he could remember from the night before, determined that even in captivity the truth would not be erased. "If they silence my body," he whispered, "let my words remain alive." Sarah, meanwhile, was questioned repeatedly. "Why did you come here?" the officers demanded. "Who sent you? Were you paid?" She lifted her eyes, red with fatigue, and answered simply, "I came because a child's life is worth more than your walls." Those words would later be quoted in American newspapers, igniting debates in living rooms, universities, and congressional halls. News of the flotilla's capture spread like wildfire. At first, confusion reigned. Live streams had cut abruptly, leaving audiences in suspense. But then came the images: soldiers storming boats, activists zip-tied, the Florida nurse crying out. In Miami, Sarah's hospital colleagues gathered around television screens, some weeping openly. "That's her," one nurse whispered, covering her mouth. "That's Sarah." In Orlando, Michael's parents clutched each other, trembling as they watched their son's face appear on international broadcasts. His mother cried, "He's alive. Thank God he's alive," though her voice shook with both relief and fury. Protests erupted in major cities. In New York, thousands marched down Fifth Avenue carrying banners, "Let Gaza live," and "From Florida to freedom." In Washington, students staged sit-ins outside embassies. In London, Paris, Cape Town, Istanbul, and Kuala Lumpur, crowds poured into the streets, chanting the names of the detained activists. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #Gaza Flotilla, #Florida Nurse, #Freedom Voyage trended for days. Videos of the interception, grainy, shaky, but undeniable, circulated widely. For many, it was the first time the blockade felt real, not just a headline, but a living, breathing injustice unfolding before their eyes. Politicians scrambled. Some defended Israel's actions as necessary security. Others condemned the violence against civilians. In the U.S. Congress, fiery debates erupted. One congresswoman from Florida held up a photograph of Sarah during a session, declaring, "This woman is a nurse from Miami. She risked her life to save children she never met. If we call her a criminal, then we have lost our moral compass." The chamber fell silent. This was not just a story, but a glimpse into the struggles shaping our world today. If you want to hear more untold dark tales of war, survival, and humanity, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because the next story might change the way you see the world.